Recording, and we start recording, I think, now. Yes, we are recording. Last week, we left with a question, or rather, we had answered the question of why it should be that Machlon Bechilin, if they both did the exact same thing, that one should be forgiven and one should be not forgiven. The form of the forgiveness is very strange. It's just that he gets a chance to come back into the world, which of course is the idea of Gilgul Neshamas, the ability to put right what you did wrong in a previous life, or to achieve what you failed to achieve in a previous life by being able to come back. As we said, apart from just one very loud dissenting voice called the Rashash, it seems to be universally accepted that reincarnation is fundamental of Jewish thought, certainly Kabbalistic thought, and the Alshich, who we are basing the Shir on, he certainly is basing so much of what we're going to learn on the idea of Gilgul Neshama. Okay, so having said all that, let's carry on the story a little bit further. So the boys are going to die, or have died. Let's see where we got up to. So it said they marry no Moabite woman. That would be a good place to plug ourselves into. We said Elimelech died. I think we did Dalet anyway, but let's look at, so therefore, Perek Aleph, chapter 1 and verse 4, just to get us into the flow, and then we'll move on a little bit further, okay? So it says, V'yisolahem noshem aviyas, they marry Moabite women. Now that's going to be important. They marry Moabite women, not women who are Moabites, and that's important. Every word counts. And I think I emphasized last week, but if not, let me repeat it now, and if or let me say it again now, and if I'm repeating myself, forgive me, because it's very important. Remember, the author of Megillas Rus was the prophet Shmuel. And Shmuel is repeatedly referred to in the Talmud and in our tradition as being the equivalent of Moshe and Aaron in combination. So in the same way as when we were looking through the eyes of the Alshich when we're studying together the Chumash, and his incisive laser focus is on every single aspect of a word, every letter, why it's the past tense when it should be in the present tense, it's the singular, it should be in the plural, etc. Then the same criteria of analysis is appropriate and applies when we're studying Megillas Rus when it's written by a prophet who is the equivalent of Moshe and Aaron in combination. So therefore, the Alshich will certainly be very strenuous and say, why does it say that and why does it say something else? Bearing in mind that if it's a prophet, it's basically somebody writing down something dictated by the author. The author is God. And God, as I sometimes say in my shirim, which sounds flippant, but I mean it quite seriously, God's good at Hebrew. There are no mistakes. So Yisraelim Pashadel Noshim Avias Shema Achus as Orpah Shema Shenis as Rus. Remember, like we said last week, it should have just said Orpah Rus. But I emphasize the name of the first one was Orpah and the second one was Rus. And that's where we left it last week, because really the youngest son, remember, it's Machlon Bechilin. Machlon's the oldest son, Chilion's the youngest son. But Orpah was the wife of Chilion. So the youngest son, Chilion, marries out first. And Machlon, then he marries out second. And our answer was, why it says the name of the first and then the name of the second was to emphasize you're not as guilty if somebody has weakened your resolve to hold out against doing an avera. Because certainly when somebody does something negative, it has an effect, is a weakening effect on you. And that's why we said that Machlon gets forgiven and Chilion doesn't. From the word Chilion is the word kalia, exterminate, finished, but Machlon means mechila. The root is forgiveness. And the form of the forgiveness is the reincarnation that he experiences when he comes back as the son that Rus is going to give birth to when she becomes pregnant through one let of marriage to Boaz. Remember, the marriage was not a normal marriage. We'll get to that in more depth next week. It was Yibum. The purpose of Yibum is that somebody has died and has died without any children. Somebody else, usually a brother, marries the wife or the sister-in-law, and the first child who is born, we anticipate the soul of the dead brother coming back. In fact, the child's named not Ben, the new husband, but Ben, the old husband, the son of him. In fact, it is him. That's where we're basically up to. Shema Shenis was Rus, so they marry two women, Orpah and Rus, and they live there. The Yeshu Ke'esa Shonim, they lived there for about 10 years. Well, the Alshich wants to emphasize this about 10 years business. The general rule is that Hashem gives us lots of time to undo the mistakes that we make in life. Normally, we don't celebrate, the Torah only mentions the celebration of one birthday, which is Paros. It's generally not a big Jewish thing to celebrate a birthday, certainly in religious communities. Here, I've lost my track. What was I going to say there? I don't know. Why was I saying that for you? Not birthdays. Anybody can switch on the microphone and give me a help. What was I saying before then? Avi, what do you say? Not a word. Moish, speak to me. Nothing. Chaim.
I zoned out.
You zoned out. Well, apparently I zoned out as well. Chaim, what was I saying before?
I got sidetracked on your sidetrack.
Well, you're a much younger man than me. In my case, I'll entirely blame you. If I've forgotten my track, then you can forget your track. Okay. Anyway, so Yemuz Gam Shneim, they both die. Machal B'chilin Tishor, he, Isha mi Shnei Boneho Yoladeho Umi Isha. And the woman is left over now from her husband and her two sons. Now, this is going to be very important. Let's look at this again. Yemuz Gam Shneim, they also die. Machal B'chilin. Now, the question really is, what did they do wrong? Now, we said last week that whatever they do wrong, they both do the same thing wrong, although we've now qualified that. Because the first one marrying out has weakened the resolve of the second. Okay, they've done the same thing wrong, but not to the same degree. I think we'll have to clarify it that way. But they both die, and again, it uses the word v'chisha er, and she is left over. The implication seems to be that she is... really deserves to die as well for the crimes of the son. We still got to delve into what the crimes of the two sons are. In the same way as she should have intervened, as we said last week, with the frying pan or the rolling pin, which is sometimes the role of a woman. She should have said to her husband, no, we're not putting down roots here. We're going back. She should also have died, says the Alshich. The Midas of Din, the strict side of judgment in heaven, was angry with her. However, she's got a role to play, and that gives her as the chut a merit to carry on, even though she fails to this extent in changing her husband's bad behavior, if we'll call it that, or remedying his mistake and getting them back to living in the land of Israel. Again, though, it says here, and they also die, and she's left over. And again, the implication is she deserves to die because she didn't force them to either go back to the land of Israel or to not marry out. And that takes us straight away to the question of what did they do wrong? They either stay out or they marry out. Now, which one is that? So let's see what the Alshich has to say here, because I think this is going to be very important. So the sons die immediately, but it's not, immediately 10 years. That's what I think I was trying to say. 10 years is a long time for a person to remedy their life. I said that birthdays are something that are not generally celebrated by religious Jews, except one birthday. There is one birthday, and I have to tell you, although this is an admission, that when a person gets to 60, I've done that, and when a person gets to 60, that's generally a cause of celebration. Because if you've done chas v'shalom anything that would leave you liable to what's called chorus, which is an indication you've done something so bad that your soul is going to be cut off as a consequence, then in that case, you usually will die before 60. The fact that you reach 60 as a cause of celebration shows that you weren't chayav chorus. You never did anything massively bad in your life. So sometimes, in fact often, religious Jews will celebrate that one birthday because God gives you a long time in general to put things right. Here it says, Ke'eser Shonim, the Alshich says, wants to emphasize, it's 10 years later. That's 10 years for them to change their minds, or have their minds perhaps changed for them. And that's something we're going to look at. Okay. Now, notice as well, but Yemuz Gam Shem, they both die, Machal and Bechilion. Now, just say they both died. I mean, look at the previous posuk. But Yisrael Nosher like this. And they married Moabite wives. Fine. And the name was Orpah and Rus. Very, very good. So we know what we're talking about. That's Machal and Bechilion. And then it tells us again, Machlan Bechilion. Well, we know they're Machlan Bechilion. Why are you telling us that? No extra words in the Torah, no extra words in Megillas Rus. And the answer, the Alshich says something very interesting. When the Megillah originally introduces us to Machlan Bechilion, they're called Ephratim. Ephratim means that the usual translations, they were aristocrats. They were of the elite of Klal Yisrael. But here it just says Machlan Bechilion. If you remember, we said that last week. We said that she is left over. Maybe if you've got the Megillah in front of you, you can see that when it says that he dies, Elimelech dies. V'yomas Elimelech ish Naomi. Naomi's husband dies. I can't remember. I told you last week, but there's a beautiful thing in life, and saying I've already admitted that I'm 60, or over 60 actually, then I'm admitting, or rather obviously implying that I have grandchildren, which I certainly do. There's a lovely thing, and it's a great thing if you can achieve this in your life, when people say to your children, are you such and such a person's daughter or son? And I'm quite, if I can allow myself to say, it gives me a great deal of pleasure that, people said that to my children. Oh, you Rabbi Rubinstein's child. But there's an even greater pleasure, and that's when people say to me, are you, and they name one of my sons, my daughter-in-law, my son Eliezer, who's a Rosh Yeshiva in England, are you Eliezer's father? It now means that the balance has been shifted. Before that, it was Elimelech the Ishto, and his wife. Her greatness was that she was the wife of Elimelech. When he stays out the land of Israel and he dies, he's called Ish Naomi. His greatness now, his yichus, his title is that he's married to her. The same thing happens here. For whatever they've done wrong, and it's interesting to note they're just called Machlan Bechilion. They've lost the title of being Ephratim, of being aristocrats. So we'll deal with the second and exactly what they've done wrong, or in more detail. But the Alshich says here a couple of things which I think I'd like to read to you a little bit from the Hebrew here and the Alshich. I'm just not experienced enough to know that if I can share the screen and put this up on there without it disturbing the video, which is why I'm not doing it. So I hope you forgive me if I read to you a little. And he says the following thing. Oid kiven bezes yishasa boy kol ha'ores amors. I want to give you an answer to all the questions I've raised in this posuk, and he raises 4 questions there. The first one we've already dealt with. Why does it say Machlan Bechilion a second time? It's not to repeat the names; it's to repeat the names without their title or without their yeshivas. But there's something else he wants to say. You see, you might turn around and say that why should it be that Naomi should be complicit or guilty in the fact that they did either they married out or they stayed out? I don't know if you have teenage sons. You try telling a teenage son what to do, and it's a very difficult task. Certainly, I know that if a young man, from lots of experience, has decided that he wants to marry a certain girl, and maybe the parents are not terribly keen, after all, they're practicing to become parents-in-law, so therefore that would be hardly surprising. If it's the case that the parents not keen, but you're dealing with a young man, how much leverage do you have? Well, generally not a lot. Notice what the posuk says. They both die. Machlan Bechilion, B'tishar ha'isha, and the woman is now left over or left alone. Mishnei Yelodeho meisha, from her 2 sons or children, and from her husband. Notice the word Yelodeho. A yeled. What's a yeled? A yeled's a child, and the implication is a very young child. You might think, under normal circumstances, one would think that she would be able to deal with them when they're young, but not when they're old. They've been there 10 years, they're married, right? So what's their age? 30? Would that be a reasonable assumption to make? After all, you're supposed to get married at age 18, and they've been there 10 years, that would take them to 28. But in her eyes, and in their eyes, they were her children. She could have affected the change of them staying out or marrying out. And she didn't, so she deserves to die a second time, says the Alshich. But again, she's got this overarching role to play, and that is she's got to escort Rus into Klal Yisrael. And that's what we're going to be dealing with in a second. She's got to escort Rus into Klal Yisrael, but she rejects Rus. Okay, the Alshich says here another thing which is very, very important. And that's going to lead us, in a very important direction. What did they die of? It says, they also died. Now, why did Elimelech die? Well, it says they also died. There's an implication in the also, that whatever Elimelech did wrong that caused his death, they also did the same thing. Well, Elimelech didn't marry non-Jewish girls or non-Jewish women. There was two possibilities. He either, on their level, and of course, we're talking that God deals with people at the highest spiritual level, uses a spiritual microscope to see them and to spot their mistakes. As the Talmud famously says, Halavai, if only our Rubinstein's mitzvahs were at the level of people like Elimelech's mistakes, they're marked at a very, very high standard. But certainly Elimelech didn't marry her. There's no implication that he had a second wife when he left Eretz Yisrael and was a co-wife for Naomi, not at all. But he stayed out. So the Alshich says in the debate as to what they did wrong, it was the fact they stayed out the land of Israel. And he gives them 10 years in order to sort that out and to go back to the land of Israel. But they don't. That essentially is the critical factor, says the Alshich, that causes them to die as well. But let's move back to this big question. And the big question is, how could it possibly be that I said that Naomi has the role of escorting Rus into the Jewish people? No, she tries to escort her out of the Jewish people. And of course, there is an enormous problem here. It's hard to think. Again, if I'm saying that God is marking, God is viewing the three men that we've discussed so far in the Megillah, that's Elimelech and his two sons, at the highest possible level, because they were at the highest possible level, which the Alshich certainly says. Everybody says that incidentally about Elimelech. He was the god Lador. It's not so clear that the same applies to his son Machal Bechilion, but the Alshich says, cites sources, that they certainly were at the highest level. It's extraordinarily difficult to imagine, therefore, that people at the very highest level would marry non-Jewish women, or at least would marry non-Jewish women who had not converted. It's very easy to imagine people at the highest level marrying Jewish and non-Jewish women who did convert. After all, Moshe Rabbeinu married somebody, God Zipporah, who she was the other half of his soul. If you are aware of the Kabbalistic comments on that, in actual fact, Moshe was a Gilgal of, as we said before, he was a Gilgal of his of Hevel, of Adam's second son. That's Zipporah, Moshe's wife, was a Gilgal of Hevel's wife. They are matim, they match each other. Well, that makes sense. They would match each other. So here we've got two men who could easily have married women who were not Jewish, but became Jewish. And in fact, as many Kabbalistic books, and the Ramban says, the Arizal says, that nobody ever converts to Judaism, and nobody ever leaves Judaism and converts to another religion. If you are a non-Jewish person and became a Jew, really you had a Jewish soul there all the time. It's just that for things you did wrong, and Rabbi Dessler quotes this and says, for example, Shmai V'Avtalion, that, Tanaim, rabbis from the time of the Mishnah, that they who were converts, that was their story. Previously, they'd been here, made mistakes, and had to come back in a more difficult and challenging way to rejoin Klal Yisrael and to get their story back on the road, or their life back on track, was the metaphor I think I was searching for. It's possible, therefore, that the fact that Yeshua marries Rochov, and many other examples, then there's no difficulty in Judaism marrying a non-Jewish woman and converting her, because in actual fact, she was Jewish all the time. But to say that to marry a non-Jewish woman who doesn't convert, and that he didn't, and that was the story of Machal Bechilion, that's extraordinarily problematic. Therefore, you have to assume, or let's assume, that they did convert them. But if they converted, why on earth did Naomi try and tell them to go back? If they're Jewish, you can't turn around to somebody who's a convert and say, oh, well, give it all up. Chas v'shalom, somebody who's converted, somebody who's a ger or a geras, is got the same, in every respect, halakhic status as somebody who was born Jewish. So how can you turn around, or how can Naomi turn around and say to Rus and to Orpah, go back to where you came from? if they're converted. And if they're not converted, which would justify her reaction in trying to get them to go home, how can you possibly square that with the sons who are tzaddikim marrying out? It's extraordinarily problematic. So, said he, stretching across, there is, I'm going to leave the Alshich aside for just a second and go to a sefer which almost in a sense can be written by the Alshich. It's equally brilliant and also is very incisive in its analysis of Psukim. And it was written by somebody called Ritzi Hirsch-Ferber. And that's actually a picture of Ritzi Hirsch-Ferber. Ritzi Hirsch-Ferber was the first Manchester Rosh Yeshiva. A remarkable man. And his knowledge of Sforim, including extraordinarily obscure Sforim, which people have almost not heard of, and he had some of them, don't know where he got them from, was really quite vast. Eventually he moved to London. Ritzi Ferber talks about this idea of them marrying out. So I think, again, I'll read to you the Hebrew, and it'll take us in a slight detour, but I think you'll find this detour intriguing. I certainly did, and it was me who took the detour. Let's see. They married Noshim Mo'aviyos, women who were Moabites. Aha! Just focus on that for a second. Women who were Moabites, well, that would settle the argument. Because we had said, did they possibly, is it conceivable they married non-Jewish women? Well, the implication of those words is yes, they married women who are Moabites. It didn't say they married Moabite women. Sorry, I'm getting this wrong. These are Noshim Moaviyas. It didn't say Moabitesses as wives, or took Moabitesses as wives, because that would say there were Moabitesses to begin with, but then became wives. Then there would be an implication of conversion. It's the other way about. Tevez lahem miyuseres, and it says, V'yisa lohem noshim aviyos. They married for themselves, or they took for themselves noshim aviyos. What's this for yourself? Lohem, just say v'yisa noshim aviyos. They married Moabite women. An extra word floating about here. He says, Tevez lahem miyuseres. It's an extra word. Hakavona ki lohem hoyoaz asura shehem aviyos. He says, they were, in fact, forbidden at that time because they were Moabitesses. Now, we know the halacha is that a Moabitess can marry into the Jewish people. That's clearly established. After all, when this debate comes up and rears its ugly head again in the days of King David, and they want to ban and expel King David from being amongst Klal Yisrael because he's a descendant of Rus, at that point there's a famous story in which it's established once and for all that no, a Moabitess is okay to marry into Klal Yisrael. But he's saying they took for themselves. That conclusion, that halakhic conclusion, that halakhic clarity had not yet been arrived at. That's going to be arrived at when King David goes out to fight the famous Philistine, who incidentally is his cousin, the grandson of Orpah. And at that point, again, this argument erupted, and it was settled halakhically once and for all. There was no problem whatsoever for a Moabite woman to marry into Klal Yisrael. But at this time in history, there was. So he says, it's an incredibly interesting idea. Even though that halachically, ultimately, objectively, there's no problem, but at that point, it was not yet makabel. It was not yet accepted, had general acceptance amongst the Jewish people, and therefore, it's not so clear-cut that that halakhic position is yet active if the Jewish people have not yet accepted it. That would lead us in a whole big sheer in its own right, but let me read a bit more to you. Even though that they were halakhically permitted, but as the Klal Yisrael is not accepted, the Jewish people has not accepted that ruling, then indeed they were forbidden to them. But in the future, in the future, they were going to be. They were going to be accepted. So they took for themselves, implication that at that stage, from that point of the debate, that argument that it's not yet been accepted by Klal Yisrael, it doesn't matter. If you are on the side of the debate that's going to, in the future, win, in the present, you've not yet won, or that debate's not won. But the next bit's very interesting. This is the bit I really wanted to get you to. So essentially, Musa Gamsh, sorry, it's one above that. Sorry. But Yisrael Noshim Eves, he repeats the same idea. Tebas Lahem Yuseres, sorry, blah, blah, that's fine. However, he says, well, let me find, I've lost the place. Yes, good. He says, yeah, because it's going to be settled. Ki Hashem chofetz laman tzidkoi ba'avor David avdol yitzera. So Hashem, carrying on from what we said before, Hashem is going to make it clear that the halacha is that a Moabite is, and therefore David is okay. But before that point, even the Sanhedrin, he writes, was not clear whether or not a Moabite test would be okay. And therefore, Machlon and Achillean were punished because they married Moabite women before it had been halakhically accepted. Now, that's what the Alshich already said, inasmuch as they didn't die. The Alshich said they died for staying outside the land of Israel. He wants to bring opinions to say that it is for marrying out, which they didn't actually do, because the halakha was going to say that it's okay to marry these women. However, the halakha had not yet been fulfilled. But then he says something interesting. I'm Mashakosov, go on Baal and Amunas Chachamim, and look at what the great genius rabbi, the Amunas Chachamim, says in Perikov Dalet, Daf Mem Tes Bein Zeh. And when I read this many years ago, I thought, oh, I've never heard of that sefer. And as I said to you, he had a wonderful library with very old Sorim, and I never heard of this Amunas Chachamim. And when I started to try and find it, and this is before the days of HebrewBooks.org, where all ancient and out-of-print books can be found, I was a bit stuck. So I was determined to find out what this reference was. So I phoned up one of the most famous libraries in the world is at Oxford University, called the Bodleian. And there I got somebody, if I remember rightly, he was called Philip. It was Philip or Charles, very royal name, that's why it stuck in my mind. And he was very, very helpful, and he knew he was in the Hebrew section, and he knew exactly the book that I wanted, but they didn't have a copy of the book. But he said to me that if I was to phone the Vatican Library in Palermo or Rome, I can't remember, and to speak to, and he gave me the name of some father something or other, then he would be able to help me. And so I had the phone number, and I phoned up. And then the Italian voice said, "Si," and I said, "Excuse me, do you speak English?" And he said, "Yes," in perfect English. And I said, "I'm looking for Father, I don't know, Pavarotti." And he said, "I'm Father Pavarotti." I said, "Father Pavarotti, I'm looking for a Jewish book. My name's Rabbi Rubenstein." I told him what I was looking for. I was looking for a sefer called Amunas Chachamim, and particular chapter 24. He said, "Si, no problemo. I have the book." I said, "Would it be possible for you to fax it to me?" It was faxes in those days, not emails and scanning. And he said, "Si," and he did. And there it is. This is, I mean, it's coming, you probably won't be able to see the page, but it's we're going back to the 16th century, if I remember correctly. And it's published in Padva, Tov Pei Tes, it says here. And I want to read to you what he says here, which I think is very interesting. It's very hard to see. It was not such a good print. However, he addresses the fact that one opinion says that they did convert, Machlon McKinley did convert these two women, and one opinion says that they didn't. And he says, Elu ve'elu divrei Abakim Chaim, both are correct. Ultimately, both are correct. But let me read you this, because this is fabulous. So how can they both be correct? So listen to this. So he says, was a good place to jump in here. They're both correct. The truth was that Machlon certainly converted Rus. But Kabbalah Aleha Oil Malchus Shemaim, but Talba Karoi, she accepted fully all the mitzvahs. She had some sort of mikveh, or maybe she was the river. She went through the tefillah process that completed the conversion. The Orpah did the exact same process for Orpah. And afterwards, Machlon married her with chuppah v'kedushin the exact same way as Adam married Chava in Gan Eden, as the Medrash says, but the same way that you and I marry our wives. Called be'ez lefi data haya be'ez v'taras ki ishtay gemuro hisa, and their married life and the consummation of married life is completely halakha okay. Okay, mitzad oitzim kedushas Rus. Therefore, if we're talking about the actual holiness, the authenticity of the conversion of Rus, there's no question, he says. Ki Odom yira le'inayim Hashem yira le'bo. And he was 100% doing this l'shem shamayim, and Hashem endorses that. He knows that was his motivation. And if that's his motivation, he didn't marry out. Therefore, we go back to the Alshich. He only died because he stayed out. But let's read on. But there was a mistake. A mistake. Not the mistake that we saw already quoted from the Kerem Asfi or Tzir Schreber, who says that it wasn't yet accepted generally, and therefore that was a mistake. He says another one. He says, because even after Achashalo Ola al Datsoi, it didn't occur to either brother, that's Machma or Chilian, Ki Machlokas hu bena poskim. Because there is an echo that echoes down all the way through to the Shulchan Aruch and the writing of the Shulchan Aruch on the following question. Kumoy shehisra b'yoridea, you can find it in Yoridea, Siman Reish Samach Ches, 268, chapter 268. V'hu ki lo hoya shem shom shlosha. There were not three who constituted the base team for the conversion. Elimelech has died. The only two male Jews there are the two brothers, Machal and Chilion. Now, can two form a base team to constitute a conversion? Interesting question. Can they or can't they? So he says that is the Rifel Rambam. According to the Rif and the Rambam, they say ein tvilosam klum v'noch re'esayasa. A conversion by two rabbis is insufficient. You need three. And all the other halakhic authorities say no, two is enough. He simply says that the two brothers believed that the conversion was 100% okay and that they are allowed to marry a Moabite woman, there's no problem whatsoever. Yes, but they weren't sensitive to the fact there was another aspect to this, but you're only two. But Naomi was. Naomi held that the halacha was like the Rambam and the Rif's position, that two are invalid for making a base team. That would perfectly square our circle, because Naomi sees that her sons believe that this conversion is valid, but she doesn't. That allows her to, as it were, redo the conversion and say to them, go back to where you came from. How can you say that? They're converts. No, she thinks they aren't. The job's not been done properly. It wasn't a base team. That conversion will have to happen later in the case of Rus. The brothers believe they've done it, and they do it l'shem shamayim, a proper conversion. Naomi halachically sees a flaw in the argument, rejects the conversion. It'll be a bit like people who sometimes come to Eretz Yisrael, I should say Medina Israel, modern Israel, who've been converted by some questionable rabbi panel based in somewhere in North America or England or something like that. Very often they will ask for a second conversion if there's a question in the first. But now we've understood that really, when Naomi rejects them, it's legitimate. But it doesn't mean that her sons did something wrong, intended to do something wrong. They intended for there to be a conversion. Rus and Orpah as well, at that stage, is on the right track. We'll come back to that next week. It's 8:40, and we'll get into the Kabbalistic aspects of this and the discovery, Naomi's discovery that the soul of her dead son, Machlin, is in fact already inside the womb of his wife, waiting to come back into the world through the mitzvah of Yibum, which Boaz is going to do at the end. I shall see you next week.